Good morning, Year 6. And this week in English, we are going to look at our narrative writing. Now, we've done loads of different types of narrative writing before. We've looked at non-linear narratives before Christmas. So a flashback that we looked at. And seeing as we're looking at A Child's War, I thought it would be really nice if we kept up that theme and we wrote a short story from something in World War II. So I've got a few here to go through with you, and then there's a reading comprehension for you to complete today. And then Tuesday and Wednesday's lesson, I'm going to go through how to plan. And I expect for Tuesday and Wednesday you spend both of those days looking at those plans, reading through those stories, and there's some sentence openers for you as well. And then Thursday and Friday, your task will be to write that short story. And I'd really, really like it if you spent quite a lot of time on this and then gave them to me, because we have got a remote learning display just for the sixes in our corridor, and I would love to put some of these short stories on, and then I can put it on Facebook, or I can do a video lesson and I can show you all the really nice work. I've got some World War II posters from history that have been on, and we're looking constantly for more work to be put on. So it's really important that you spend that time doing that long piece of writing on Thursday and Friday and put the work in this week, because you never know, it might appear on the wall in our school for everybody to see. So the first short story is called The Day My Life Changed Forever. It was Sunday, the day after my 11th birthday. The year was 1939 and war against Hitler had just begun. However, this wasn't just any old Sunday. As I lay in my comfy bed, dreaming about playing football in the cobbled streets just outside my house, I remembered this was evacuation day. Tears streamed down the sides of my pale cheeks like a waterfall. Shutting my eyes, I tried to fall back into a deep slumber. No luck. I could hear Mother shouting up to me, "Are you awake yet, Tom? Don't forget to put on your best Sunday suit." "I don't want to," I cried, pulling the covers over my scrunched up face. To tell you the truth, I was petrified of leaving Mother. You see, that week during a night raid, a bakery just a few streets away was bombed by V-5 German bomber planes, which killed the Hollyman family. I kept contemplating, what if that happened to Mother? What if I wasn't there to protect her? Dad was about to be sent to war, so Mother would be all alone. Reluctantly, I dragged myself out of my bed, wondering whether I will ever get to sleep in it again. Looking solemnly out of the window, I was suddenly reminded of the danger we were in. Demolished and destroyed buildings lined the pavements. I turned to look at my little sister Rose, who was still sleeping like an angel, far from what she was really like. Trouble, that's what my dad used to say. It was then I realised I had to go. It was my duty to look after Rose, and she was not safe here in the city. So before I read the next page, I just want to highlight some things to you, Year 6. So we've got some parentheses here in our brackets, okay? As I lay in my comfy bed, we've got a clause here, okay? We've got a fronted adverbial here, reluctantly. We've got some speech here. We have like a waterfall. We've got a simile over here. Okay, these are all things you should be picking up on and trying to mimic when you're doing your piece of writing. So even when we're reading these stories, that's what we need to look at. We've got a lot of varied sentence structures in here. Trouble, just a one-word sentence. Fabulous. Okay, let's read the next part. A few hours later, we hurried to the train station. Rose wore her best Sunday dress, soft and silky pink with a bow in the middle, and I wore my navy blazer along with a cap. Small cardboard boxes containing our gas masks hung from our shoulders, and attached to our coats were large labels, which had our name, age, and school written on. In our hands, we held a square brown suitcase, which carried our clothes and favourite toy. Mother held our hands tight as we stood amongst hundreds of other children, teachers and parents. I had never seen Mother so upset before. Her crimson red lips quivered and her body was shaking. Trying to look as brave as she could, she gave us both our last hug and kiss goodbye and whispered softly, "You are a brave boy, Tom. Look after your sister for me. I love you and I will see you very soon." "I promise," I relied as I hugged her tightly. It all happened so quickly. Within minutes we were led onto the crowded train by officials in long black coats. Suddenly the train doors slammed shut. Like a bolt of lightning, silence struck the train, followed by the deafening screams and cries of terrified and nervous children. Although my stomach was churning like a wheel, I kept strong and didn't shed a tear, as I didn't want to frighten Rose, whose blue shiny eyes glared at me. Staring out of the steamed-up windows, I could see mothers hugging in floods of tears. My eyes darted around the platform, hoping to catch a final goodbye from Mother, but I failed to see her. Again, year 6, let's just go over some of this amazing vocabulary here. We have like a bolt of lightning, another simile here. Okay, silence struck. We've got some good alliteration here as well. Deafening screams. Okay, we've got stomach was churning back like a wheel. We've got a relative clause in here, whose blue shiny eyes glared at me. I kept strong and didn't shed a tear, as I didn't want to frighten Rose. Okay, and then we've got the clause here. We've still got some speech, direct speech, but remember, it only moves the story on if it doesn't serve that purpose of giving us more information or telling the story a bit further. It doesn't need to be in. Soon the train rumbled and puffed out of the station, steaming through luscious lime-green fields where cows and sheep were peacefully grazing. Tremendous tall trees swayed in the wind, their branches waving goodbye as we got deeper and deeper into the countryside. Clear blue streams trickled down enormous hills like the tears I wanted to cry. It was a long journey, and soon Rose was fast asleep, her head gently resting on my shoulder. After a few hours, the rusty train arrived at a strangely named place called Landrindod. Rose could read, but she couldn't read this word. Everyone was tired, hot, and miserable. Here we marched into a nearby school with a silver gate and grey bricks. We were made to stand in rows like smartly dressed soldiers. My heart raced as a group of adults collected children one by one. Was I going to be split up from my sister? Even though she was annoying, that would be like losing an arm or leg. How could I protect her? How could I keep my promise? 5 minutes felt like 5 hours as slowly the crowd of anxious children dispersed. To my surprise, a lady in a bright blue coat and hat stretched out her arm to shake my hand, and in a soft voice she said, "Hello, Tom. Hello, Rose. I'm Mrs. Williams, and you will be coming with me." "Both of us?" I asked wearily. "Yes, it is going to be a bit of a squeeze. You will have to share a room, and of course there will be chores to do. Now, are we ready to go?" So we've got some lovely vocabulary here, year 6. We've got dispersed here. We've got some questions as well, some of his own personal thoughts that he's worried about in his head. We're getting to know. We've got a 3 here, a tired, hot, and miserable. Okay. We've got peacefully grazing, some really lovely vocabulary in here. You could magpie. Suddenly, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew we were going to be safe. Mrs. Williams was a short lady with bouncy brown curly hair, just like Mother's. Walking hand in hand through the quiet village, Mrs. Williams told us how her husband was serving in the army and that she now lived alone. She told us how she had always wanted children. Eventually, we arrived at a dainty cottage with a straw roof. Inside, a glowing amber fire lit up the room with dancing golden flames. Also in the room sat a tin bath and a wooden table and chairs. Mrs. Williams insisted that we both had a bath. Later on, I asked if I could write a letter to Mother, and Mrs. Williams helped me. Although I felt safe, I couldn't help but miss Mother incredibly. At the time, I remember thinking that this was one of the hardest days of my life. Little did I know it was about to get much harder. So can you see there, they've ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. So you could think about your ending. Is it going to be a cliffhanger? Are you going to leave people in suspense? Okay. Are you going to end it where they've just evacuated? Are you going to end it where a bomb's just dropped on the house, like when we've been looking at the Blitz? Okay. This is your decision. Okay, so we've got another story here. Now, it doesn't have a title, okay, but we're just going to have a look at this one as well. So we've got a variety to choose from. It was late summer 1943, and London was being hit by a new wave of bombs called V1s. The battered city and its inhabitants kept on going as well as they could. Even on the worst days, there was a feeling of unconquerable spirit. The men who were not in the army went about daily jobs with grim determination. Women now filled the gaps left by men called to the arms. The children of England had to make the best of things each day that dawned. By the end of 1943 and at the beginning of 1944, the Germans had a newer and more powerful rocket, the V2. So for London and the south of the country, it became steadily worse. It was then that many parents who, until then, had struggled to keep their families together, decided to part with their children by way of evacuation. A group of kids from the area around Royal Mint Street near the Tower of London were got together and plans made for departure. For those going, it seemed at the time like a great adventure. At school, rumours flew thick and fast. Places were mentioned: America, Scotland, and Canada. Then the day came to go. There are 4 of us in my family, and my father, who was over the age for war service, together with my mother, got us prepared for what was to come. Clothes, gas masks, ration books, all that was needed for our time away from home. Again, year 6, we've got some parenthesis in here, okay? Be really, really mindful, and here as well to introduce the list. Off we went to Paddington Station, still not knowing our final destination. The station was a seething mass of children, all being led towards a very long train, standing waiting for the journey. Labels were attached to our coat buttons stating our names, etc. At this point, all the noise and confusion had taken away some of the fact that we were leaving our homes, mums, dads, and all things familiar to us. Onto the train, into various compartments, accompanied by bustling and harassed officials who were to supervise the journey. Then came a great closing of the train doors, and that is when the realization came that we were being separated from all that was dear to us. A moment of silence, followed by a great deal of crying, especially from the younger kids, affected everyone on the train. Along the platform, too, the mums were in floods of tears, which in time got the dads going, and eventually the porters, policemen, and any onlookers. There was not a dry eye anywhere to be seen. Then, as the train started to pull away, sobbing and crying, kids and parents waved goodbye and we were off. 15 minutes of solid crying, followed with the older girls amongst us trying to comfort the younger children. Then, as if by magic, it was an adventure beginning. Out came the eatables we had brought, especially sweets, being shared with no thought of any hunger later. Being on our way, our thoughts now turned to looking out of the windows, which held our attention for the next few minutes. Somehow, our destination filtered through the compartments. Perhaps someone had asked. It was South Wales. To many of us kids, never having been away from home before, this could have been the other side of the world. All at once, some of the people in charge came and marshalled us into the corridors for refreshments which were to be served in the guard's van. When we arrived in the guard's van, we were handed paper cups, and then we joined a queue where these were filled with milk. Each child was also given what looked like a dog biscuit, square, full of holes and very hard. Curiosity got the better of us, and some of us took a bite. Ugh and ugh were the only sounds after that. So when the officials' backs were turned, we all took turns into going into the open window and threw out the dog biscuits. There must have been a line of biscuit for miles. Eventually, the time passed and we finally reached our destination. The train began to slow down. A station loomed alongside as we were told to assemble our belongings. Then it was onto the platform, which produced a fair amount of confusion. Transport had been arranged and we were driven to a village hall where local people had managed to arrange some sort of a meal for us. Rows of kids were seated at the tables on which were plates of sandwiches, which turned out to be jam. There was also some homemade cake, and we washed it down with a mug of weak tea. This was the best that could be mustered in these hard days of war. We made an effort to eat, but tiredness and homesickness was settling in. Along with that, there were those amongst us with a heady sense of freedom, being away from parental control. The local helpers were more than astonished when rebellion broke out with jam sandwiches and cake being used as weapons. Across the tables, battle raged, and for a while, chaos reigned. Eventually, order was restored, and then batches of children were taken to various forms of transport. Our group was destined to go to a place called Kemfelenfach, a small village some miles from Newport town. In the grounds of the local school we congregated, there being a lot of people waiting. They had turned out to take some of the Cockney kids into their home. One by one, people chose the children they wanted. My younger sister and I were picked out by a youngish couple. However, when the official came to remove us, I stood my ground, announcing that my mother had said we were all to stay together. Okay, so on that story, you get a lot of information about what happened in evacuation. So maybe you could use that to help you write your story. I think the first story had better language in, but you got more information out of the second. So maybe a combination of those two. Now this is the start of the text that's got your reading comprehension. So on your resources in your assignment, it will say something like World War II reading comprehension text, and that's the text that's got the questions on underneath. The other two are just there so that you can have them when you're writing your story. Okay. Peter hated the way the other boys at school called him Pauper Pete. He knew he was different to all the other boys in the village. It was okay for them. They hadn't had to leave their home in London and come to a strange place full of strange people. They weren't constantly worrying about hearing bad news, news about bombing, news about homes being destroyed, about people dying, or children never seeing their families again. He knew he had tatty clothes. He knew he wasn't as strong as the other boys, and he knew that they didn't care about his feelings. So he just put up with their name calling. He ignored their teasing and laughing, and he just counted each day, hoping that the war would soon be over and he could go back home. Peter had arrived in the small picturesque village of Rain 2 weeks ago, and he had been counting every minute of every day. Although the new home he was staying in with old Mrs. Brown was spacious and clean, he missed his own home terribly. It made his chest ache to think of home. His home in London was small, dark and damp. His father had died when he was a baby, and his mother found it hard coping on her own. Even though he was being looked after well by Mrs. Brown, he still looked skinny and gaunt. His eyes had dark shadows beneath them, his skin seemed a grey colour, and his hair was short and wiry and was a dirty brown. You could tell that he was not used to eating good, healthy food, and fresh country air was foreign to him. Because he was used to the busy streets of London, he had an amazing ability to find his way round. He would often walk for miles, running errands for his mother, and although he was skinny and weak-looking, he was quick, and his arms and hands had grown strong from doing the manly jobs around the home, as his mother called them. Mickey was the boy who had started the name-calling, and there's more of that text on your resources. It's really interesting, boys and girls. There's a lot of threes in here about he knew. He ignores their teasing and laughing and counted each day. So there's 3 things he did. So it's really interesting to look at that and compare that to the other texts. So these are some texts to help you with your writing. And then tomorrow and Wednesday, we are going to look at planning. Okay.